My name is Dominique Wilson, and the night my mother slapped my 6-year-old daughter across the Thanksgiving table was the night I finally understood that blood can become the sharpest knife in the room. I was 35 years old enough to know my family was toxic, old enough to understand that my parents had always measured worth by skin tone, money, and proximity to the kind of respectability they worshipped more than love. Still, some childish part of me had kept hoping there was a line they would never cross. I thought maybe they could dislike me and still protect my daughter. I thought maybe they could criticize my choices and still recognize Zuri as innocent. I thought maybe Thanksgiving, of all nights, would force them to behave like decent people for a few hours. I was wrong. My parents' house in Oak Park, Illinois, looked perfect from the outside, and that was exactly how Brenda and Calvin Wilson wanted the world to see them. The brick estate sat behind iron gates, surrounded by trimmed hedges, expensive landscaping, and a driveway wide enough to make visitors feel small before they even reached the front door. Inside, the house smelled like roasted turkey, cinnamon candles, and old money my parents desperately wanted people to believe they had always possessed. The dining room had been staged like a magazine spread: fine china, crystal glasses, polished silverware, imported flowers, and an enormous turkey placed in the center of the table like a trophy. Every detail screamed elegance. Every smile screamed performance. My older sister Chantel sat beside her husband Trent near my mother, glowing under the family spotlight like she had been born to receive applause. Chantel had always been the chosen one. She had lighter skin, softer curls, and the kind of beauty my mother described as marketable when she thought nobody was listening. She married Trent, a smooth-talking white man with a polished corporate voice, a leased luxury watch, and the confidence of someone who had spent his whole life entering rooms that welcomed him before he earned it. To my parents, Trent was not simply a son-in-law. He was proof that Chantel had won, and their son Bryce, my 7-year-old nephew, was treated like royalty. If Bryce interrupted, he was expressive. If Bryce grabbed something, he was curious. If Bryce shouted, he was confident. My daughter Zuri, on the other hand, had to sit still, smile softly, and never take up too much space. Zuri was 6 years old, dark-skinned, bright-eyed, and full of a joy my family had never known how to handle. She had thick natural curls that framed her face like a crown, the kind of hair my mother used to call difficult when it grew from my scalp. That night, Zuri sat beside me in a deep green dress she picked out herself, quietly drawing on her tablet while the adults performed their annual ritual of pretending we were a functional family. She was not bothering anyone. She was not demanding attention. She was simply existing. That should have been enough. But in my family, a dark-skinned little girl existing confidently was already too much. The trouble started when Bryce noticed the tablet. He leaned across his plate, looked at Zuri's drawing game, and said, "I want that." Zuri glanced at him and answered politely, "I'm using it right now. You can play after me." It was a normal child's response. Calm. Fair. Reasonable. Bryce did not like being told no. His face twisted with offense, and before anyone could intervene, he reached across the table and snatched the tablet from Zuri's hands hard enough to scrape her wrist against the edge of her plate. Zuri gasped and grabbed for it. "Bryce, stop. That's mine." She pulled the tablet back toward her chest. That was all she did. She protected what belonged to her. But my mother saw defiance. Brenda lunged forward so suddenly that her chair scraped across the floor. Her manicured hand cut across the table, past the gravy boat and the sweet potatoes, and struck Zuri's fingers with a sharp slap that cracked through the dining room like breaking glass. For one frozen second, nobody breathed. Then Zuri made a small broken sound and clutched her hand to her chest, her eyes filling with tears so fast it stole the air from my lungs. My daughter looked at her grandmother with pure confusion, because children still expect adults to make sense. Brenda's face was hard with rage. "Let him have it," she snapped. "You ungrateful little girl." My chair pushed back so fast it nearly fell. "Do not touch my child." My voice came out low, not loud, and somehow that made the room even quieter. My father Calvin did not look at Zuri's hand. He did not ask whether she was hurt. He simply cut into his turkey as if a grown woman slapping a child across the table was a minor inconvenience. "Dominique, control your daughter," he muttered. "She is always too loud, too stubborn, too aggressive. You encourage it." I stared at him. For a moment I could not even process the words. Zuri had been sitting quietly. Bryce had snatched from her. Brenda had hit her. Yet somehow my daughter was the problem. Chantel gave a soft little laugh from across the table, lifting her wine glass with the lazy satisfaction of someone watching a familiar scene play out exactly as expected. Trent leaned back in his chair, already preparing the calm white man speech he used whenever racism needed to be softened into a misunderstanding. Then Brenda wiped her hand on her linen napkin as if touching my daughter had disgusted her. Her next words did not come out as a scream. They came out worse than that. They came out casual. She is just an ugly black girl who needs to learn her place next to Bryce. The room went completely silent. Not shocked silent, guilty silent. The kind of silence that reveals everyone heard what was said, and nobody wants to be responsible for responding. Zuri's eyes widened. Her little lips trembled. I felt something inside me go cold and final. Not angry. Not broken. Final. I walked around the table, bent down beside my daughter, and gently took her injured hand in mine. Her fingers were warm and shaking. "Am I ugly, Mommy?" she whispered. That question nearly split me open. I touched her cheek and forced my voice to stay steady. "No, baby, you are beautiful. You are brilliant. You are perfect." I helped her down from the chair, wrapped her little coat around her shoulders, and picked up her tablet from the table. Nobody moved. They were waiting for the explosion. They wanted the angry version of me, the unstable version, the version they could later describe to their church friends and country club acquaintances. I refused to give them that gift. Instead, I turned to my mother and smiled without warmth. "Learn her place, Mom?" Brenda's chin lifted. She was still convinced she had authority. "Yes, someone has to teach her." I nodded slowly. "Like you taught me mine when you drained my college savings account to pay for Chantel's $500,000 wedding?" My mother's face changed. Chantel's glass paused halfway to her mouth. Calvin's knife stopped moving against his plate. I continued. "Or like when you made me and my daughter sleep in the damp basement every holiday so Bryce could have his own playroom upstairs. Or when you told me to straighten Zuri's hair before family photos because her natural curls made the picture look too ethnic." Brenda's lips parted, but no words came. "You have always hated the parts of me you could not make lighter, quieter, or more acceptable. And it kills you that Zuri carries those same beautiful parts without shame." Trent stood then, raising both hands like he was calming a difficult employee. "Dominique, let's not make this about race. Everyone is emotional. We are all family here." I turned my head slowly toward him. "Trent, the only thing being played here is my father's retirement fund, which you have been quietly bleeding to keep your failed startups alive." The color drained from his face. Chantel's wineglass slipped from her fingers and spilled red across the white tablecloth. Calvin finally looked up. I held Trent's gaze. "You are a bad investment in a leased Rolex. Do not ever speak to me or my child again." Then I took Zuri's hand and walked out. Behind me, the dining room erupted into shocked voices, but none of them mattered anymore. Outside, the November air felt clean against my skin. I buckled Zuri into her car seat, kissed her forehead, and promised her we would never return to that house. As I closed her door, my phone buzzed. I expected insults from Chantel. Instead, an email notification lit up my screen from the global media conglomerate I had been negotiating with for 8 months. The subject line read, "Contract executed. Welcome to Times Square, Zuri." My hand froze over the phone. I opened the message and read the first line twice. The $10 million Crown of Curls campaign was officially approved, and my beautiful dark-skinned daughter was about to become the face of a national movement. Behind me, my family was still sitting in that dining room believing they had put us in our place. They had no idea the entire country was about to learn Zuri's name. I didn't cry until we were halfway home. Not because of what my mother said, not because of the slap, not even because my family had once again proven exactly who they were. I cried because of the question Zuri asked in the car. She sat quietly in the back seat, staring out the window while streetlights flashed across her face. For almost 10 minutes, she didn't say anything. Then her small voice broke the silence. "Grandma really thinks I'm ugly, doesn't she?" The words hit harder than anything Brenda had said at the table. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "No, baby. Then why does she always look at me like that?" I didn't have an easy answer. Children notice more than adults realize. Zuri had spent years watching the difference between how my family treated her and how they treated Bryce. She noticed who received gifts. She noticed who received compliments. She noticed whose pictures got framed and whose pictures disappeared into drawers. Most of all, she noticed who was celebrated and who was tolerated. Sometimes people have ugly hearts, I finally said. And when people have ugly hearts, they stop seeing beauty, even when it's right in front of them. Zuri looked down at her hands. The same hands Brenda had struck less than an hour earlier. Am I beautiful? She whispered. I immediately pulled the car into a parking lot and turned toward her. You are the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. A tiny smile appeared. Not because she completely believed me yet, because she wanted to. Promise? I promise. She nodded slowly and leaned back against her seat. Within minutes, she was asleep. The emotional exhaustion had finally caught up with her. As I watched her sleeping face in the rearview mirror, the anger I felt toward my family transformed into something colder. Determination. For years, I tolerated their behavior because it was directed at me. The moment they turned that cruelty toward my daughter, everything changed. 30 minutes later, we arrived home. Not the apartment my family imagined I lived in. Not the struggling single mother existence they joked about behind my back. Home. My penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower overlooking downtown Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the living room. The skyline glowed beyond the glass like a field of stars. Custom artwork lined the walls. A grand piano sat near the fireplace. Every detail reflected years of work, sacrifice, and success. The funny thing was that my family never asked where I lived. They preferred assumptions. Assumptions were easier than truth. I carried Zuri inside and tucked her into bed. She never woke up. After pulling the blanket over her shoulders, I sat beside her for a moment and brushed a curl away from her forehead. Looking at her sleeping peacefully, nobody would ever guess how much pain she carried because of people who should have loved her. That ends now, I whispered. Then I stood and walked downstairs. My phone exploded with notifications the second I entered my office. Emails, text messages, calendar updates, investor communications, brand approvals. Most people would have felt overwhelmed. To me, it was Tuesday. I sat behind the massive walnut desk overlooking the city and opened the message that arrived earlier in the driveway. The email came from Crown of Curls, one of the largest natural hair care brands in North America. I had spent 8 months negotiating this campaign. 8 months of presentations, strategy meetings, legal reviews, and creative development. The subject line still made my heart race. Contract executed. Welcome to the campaign. I opened the attachment. $10 million. The final number appeared at the bottom of the agreement. $10 million for a national campaign centered around confidence, identity, and natural beauty. More importantly, the campaign's face wasn't a celebrity. It wasn't an influencer. It wasn't a child actor. It was Zuri, my daughter. I leaned back in my chair and smiled for the first time all night. Brenda called her ugly. In less than 3 months, millions of people across America would see her face on billboards, television commercials, streaming platforms, magazines, and digital campaigns. The irony was almost poetic. Another notification appeared. This one came from my executive assistant, Renee. Congratulations, Times Square secured. I immediately opened the attachment she sent. A digital mock-up filled the screen. My breath caught. There, towering above Manhattan traffic on one of the largest electronic billboards in Times Square, stood a smiling image of Zuri wearing her natural curls proudly. Beneath the image appeared the campaign slogan, "Beauty begins when you believe it." Tears filled my eyes again, but this time they weren't caused by pain. They were caused by pride. Every insult my family ever threw at me suddenly felt smaller. Every cruel comment, every comparison, every rejection, none of it mattered in that moment. Zuri was going to see a version of herself celebrated by the world, a version my family spent years trying to diminish. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Renee appeared on a video call. I assume you saw the contract. I smiled. I saw it. The board approved everything unanimously. What about the expansion? Renee laughed. Dominique, after today, nobody is questioning your strategy. I nodded. That wasn't surprising. Over the last 7 years, I had quietly built one of the fastest growing multicultural media companies in the country. Acquisitions, advertising, production, licensing, investments. Most business magazines knew my name. Most investors knew my name. Most competitors knew my name. The only people who didn't know were my family, because they never cared enough to ask what happened after I left home. They had already decided who I was. Success became invisible once it contradicted the story they preferred. Renee continued discussing schedules and campaign launches, but my attention drifted toward the city lights beyond the window. Somewhere back in Oak Park, my family was probably still sitting around that dining table convincing themselves they had won another battle. They thought they put me in my place. They thought I left humiliated. They thought I was still the struggling daughter they could safely mock. They had no idea my company was preparing to launch the biggest campaign in its history. They had no idea their granddaughter was about to become a national symbol. Most importantly, they had no idea how quickly their world was about to collide with mine. As if the universe wanted to confirm that thought, another notification appeared on my phone. This one came from an unknown number. The voicemail transcript automatically appeared beneath it. I froze the second I saw the sender's name attached to the message, Chantel Wilson. My sister had never called me this late at night before. And judging by the tone of the transcript preview, she wasn't calling to apologize. I almost deleted the voicemail without listening to it. After everything that happened at Thanksgiving dinner, I had no interest in hearing my sister's voice. Unfortunately, curiosity won. I pressed play and set my phone on the desk. Chantel's voice filled the office almost immediately. Dominique, I don't know what kind of stunt you were trying to pull tonight, but Mom has been crying for hours. Dad is furious. Everybody thinks you owe them an apology. Call me back. The message ended there. No concern for Zuri, no acknowledgement of the slap, no regret. Just another demand that I make everyone else comfortable. I laughed once and deleted the recording. Then I went upstairs, checked on Zuri one more time, and tried to sleep. The problem was that sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my daughter's face after Brenda hit her. Every time I drifted off, I heard that question again. Am I ugly? By sunrise, I had made a decision. Thanksgiving was the last holiday my daughter would ever spend, trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. The next morning started like every other morning in my world. By 7 o'clock, I was already in a conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. Executives filled the table. Marketing directors joined through video calls. Financial projections covered 3 separate screens. Nobody there knew I spent the previous evening being treated like a disappointment by my own family. To them, I was simply Dominique Wilson, founder and chief executive officer of Crown Legacy Media Group. We spent 2 hours reviewing campaign schedules. Crown of Curls dominated most of the discussion. Retail partners wanted expansion. Streaming platforms wanted interviews. National morning shows wanted appearances. The campaign was already generating excitement before launch. By the time the meeting ended, my phone showed 3 missed calls from Chantel. I ignored all of them. 20 minutes later, Renee entered my office carrying a tablet. We have a problem. I looked up immediately. Renee never used that tone unless something serious happened. What kind of problem? She handed me the device. Some woman has been calling the corporate office for an hour demanding to speak to ownership. I looked at the screen. Call logs filled the display. One name appeared repeatedly. Chantel Wilson. I actually smiled. How many times? 14. Renee folded her arms. Security thought she was unstable. That wasn't surprising. Chantel had always assumed persistence could replace intelligence. What does she want? Renee tapped another file. Apparently, she believes one of our employees insulted her family, and she wants that employee terminated. My smile widened. Suddenly, everything made sense. Sometime after Thanksgiving dinner, Chantel must have investigated the Crown of Curls campaign and discovered my name attached to it. But instead of realizing I owned the company, she reached the most predictable conclusion possible. She assumed I worked there. In her mind, I was still the struggling daughter chasing opportunities she would never catch. The idea that I built the entire company probably never crossed her mind. Transfer the next call directly to my office, I said. Renee's expression brightened immediately. This should be entertaining. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. I answered calmly. "This is Dominique." Chantel launched into her speech so quickly she barely paused for air. "Finally. I've been trying to reach someone with authority all morning. One of your employees has serious behavioral issues." I muted the call long enough to laugh. Then I turned the sound back on. "Really?" "Yes. She verbally attacked our family at Thanksgiving. She made false accusations against my husband. She created a hostile environment." Every sentence became more ridiculous than the one before it. "And who exactly is this employee?" I asked. "Dominique Wilson." I nearly lost composure again. "I see. She represents your company, doesn't she?" Chantel continued. "Frankly, if this is how your staff behaves, I understand why your business isn't more successful." That one almost hurt from irony. I leaned back in my chair and glanced at the framed business award sitting on my bookshelf. Last year, Forbes named Crown Legacy one of the fastest-growing privately held media companies in America. Apparently, my sister missed that article. "What would you like me to do?" I asked. "Fire her." The answer came instantly. No hesitation. No guilt. No reflection. Fire her. I wasn't her sister anymore. I was an obstacle. "That's a serious request." "Good. Then take it seriously." I let several seconds pass. Then I spoke carefully. "Before I make that decision, there is something you should know." Silence. Finally, curiosity. "What?" I smiled. "Dominique Wilson isn't an employee." Chantel laughed. "What are you talking about? She doesn't work for the company." Another pause. "Then why is she attached to the campaign?" "Because she created the campaign." The silence became longer this time. I could practically hear confusion forming inside her head. "Created it?" "Yes." "What does that even mean?" I stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. "It means she founded the company. It means she owns the company. It means every person you've demanded to speak with reports to her." Nothing. Absolute silence. Then came a small, nervous laugh. "That's not funny." I wasn't joking. More silence. This time it felt different, heavier, more dangerous. For the first time, Chantel wasn't hearing something she disliked. She was hearing something she couldn't immediately dismiss. "No," she finally whispered. "That's impossible." I looked down at the streets far below. Funny. That's exactly what everyone says before reality introduces itself. Her breathing changed. Fast. Uneven. Shocked. Years of assumptions were colliding with facts. The version of me she carried in her head was beginning to crack apart. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. "How much is the company worth?" There it was. Not, "Are you happy?" Not, "How is Zuri?" Not, "Why didn't you tell us?" Money. Always money. I smiled sadly. Some people reveal their priorities without realizing it. "Goodbye, Chantel." I ended the call before she could speak again. 30 seconds later, my phone started ringing nonstop. Chantel, then my mother, then my father, then Trent, then Chantel again. I ignored every single call. But while the phones continued vibrating across my desk, a far more interesting email arrived in my inbox. The sender's name made me sit up immediately. Calvin Wilson. My father never emailed me unless he wanted something. And judging by the subject line, he wanted something very badly. I stared at my father's email for nearly a full minute before opening it, not because I was surprised he contacted me, because I already knew exactly what the message would contain. People like Calvin Wilson rarely reached out when they discovered they were wrong. They reached out when they believed they had found a new opportunity. The subject line confirmed my suspicion immediately. "We need to talk." Not "I'm sorry," not "How is Zuri," not "I made a mistake." "We need to talk." The language itself revealed everything. I opened the message and read it once. Then I read it again, just to make sure I wasn't imagining the audacity. "Dominique, your mother and I were surprised to learn about your business success. Congratulations. Clearly there have been misunderstandings on both sides. Family should support one another. There are important financial matters we need to discuss. Call me as soon as possible." I laughed so hard that Renee looked into my office to make sure I was okay. Less than 24 hours earlier, my daughter had been slapped across a Thanksgiving table. Less than 24 hours earlier, my mother called her ugly. Less than 24 hours earlier, my father sat there and defended it. Yet somehow the first thing he wanted to discuss after discovering I was successful was financial matters. Not family, money, always money. I deleted the email and returned to work. Unfortunately, Calvin Wilson was not a man accustomed to being ignored. By lunchtime, he had called 7 times. By mid-afternoon, the number climbed to 14. By 5 o'clock, he had left 4 voicemails and 3 emails. The persistence would have been impressive if it came from love. Instead, it came from entitlement. Around 6 that evening, I finally answered. Mostly because I was curious how long it would take him to reveal what he really wanted. Dominique. Relief immediately filled his voice. I've been trying to reach you all day. I noticed. You should have called back. There was no apology. No concern. Not even a greeting. Just criticism. Some habits never change. What do you want, Dad? Silence followed. A brief silence. The kind people use when trying to decide how quickly to begin manipulating someone. Your mother feels terrible about what happened. That lie arrived exactly on schedule. I leaned back in my chair. Really? Of course. Then why hasn't she called Zuri? Another silence. Longer this time. She's embarrassed. No, she's not. Calvin exhaled heavily. The performance was already becoming difficult. Dominique, do we really need to do this? Yes. His patience started disappearing. Fine. Your mother handled the situation poorly. Handled the situation poorly. That was how he described striking a 6-year-old child. Anything else? What more do you want? The answer told me everything. In his mind, that was enough. A half-hearted acknowledgement delivered only because he needed something. Then his voice changed. Softer, friendlier, more strategic. Here came the real conversation. You've obviously done very well for yourself. I almost smiled. There it was, the transition. We had finally arrived at the reason for the call. I do okay. Dominique, your company is worth tens of millions of dollars. The fact that he already knew that told me he spent most of the day researching me. Apparently learning about my success was more important than checking on his granddaughter. Maybe. Your mother and I are proud of you. I nearly ended the call right there. Not because the statement was offensive, because it was insulting. Pride requires knowledge. Pride requires support. Pride requires participation. They didn't know anything about my journey because they never cared enough to ask about it. What do you want? I repeated. Another pause. Then finally, the truth. Trent's company is experiencing temporary liquidity issues. I closed my eyes. Of course it was Trent. Every road somehow led back to Trent. Temporary liquidity issues? A cash flow problem. Meaning? The market shifted unexpectedly. Translation. The business was failing. Calvin continued speaking before I could respond. Nothing serious, just a short-term challenge. With the right support, everything will stabilize. I had heard that speech before. Several times. Every failed entrepreneur sounds like a genius moments before bankruptcy. How much? I asked. Silence. Then a number. $3 million. I actually laughed. Not politely. Not quietly. Laughed. $3 million. My father wasn't calling to reconnect. He wasn't calling to apologize. He wasn't calling because he loved me. He was calling because he thought I could rescue Trent. No. The answer came immediately. Dominique, listen. No. You haven't even heard the details. I don't need the details. His voice hardened. Family helps family. The irony almost broke me. Family helps family. The same people who treated my daughter like an inconvenience suddenly wanted family loyalty. Where was that philosophy yesterday? I asked. Calvin didn't answer. Because there was no answer. Dad, Trent doesn't have a liquidity problem. You don't know that. Actually, I do. Silence. Genuine silence this time. The dangerous kind. What are you talking about? I walked toward the windows overlooking the city. The sun was setting behind the skyline. I'm talking about the fact that Trent's company has been losing money for 3 years. Nothing. I'm talking about the investor lawsuits that haven't gone public yet. More silence. I'm talking about the vendor disputes, the inflated projections, and the debt restructuring discussions happening behind closed doors. My father's breathing changed. How do you know that? Because I owned a media company with an investment division. Because my analysts monitored hundreds of businesses every year. Because Trent wasn't nearly as clever as he believed. But I didn't explain any of that. The better question is why you don't. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Calvin asked something that confirmed every suspicion I had about him. Can you save him? Not should he be saved? Not did he do anything wrong? Can you save him? I looked out across the city lights beginning to appear below. No. His voice rose immediately. You would let your own family fail? I laughed again. You mean the same family that called my daughter ugly? That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this. My father's anger finally surfaced. The polite mask disappeared. You always hold grudges. There it was. Accountability translated into bitterness. Another family classic. Goodbye, Dad. Dominique, one more thing. He stopped talking. I lowered my voice slightly. You should be very careful about how much trust you place in Trent. Silence. What does that mean? I thought about answering. Then I decided against it. Some lessons have to arrive on their own. Goodbye. I ended the call and set the phone down. Less than a minute later, it rang again. This time it wasn't my father. It wasn't my mother. It wasn't Chantel. It was Trent himself. And judging by the anger already visible in the voicemail preview appearing on my screen, he had just learned that I refused to become his personal bank account. I let Trent's call ring until it stopped. Then he called again. And again. By the fifth attempt, I already knew exactly what kind of conversation he wanted. The same type of conversation men like Trent always wanted when money disappeared. First came confidence, then came excuses, then came demands, finally came blame. I wasn't interested in any of them. I silenced my phone and returned to the campaign presentation spread across my desk. For the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, my focus shifted away from my family and back toward the future, more specifically, toward my daughter. Because no matter how much chaos Brenda, Calvin, Chantel, and Trent created, the truth remained unchanged. Zuri deserved something better than the world they were trying to force on her. 2 days later, I took her to the Crown of Curls headquarters for her first official campaign meeting. The building occupied 3 floors of a renovated industrial space overlooking the Chicago River. Bright murals covered the walls. Natural light filled every room. Everywhere we looked, photographs celebrated women and girls whose beauty traditional media often ignored. The second Zuri stepped through the doors, she froze. Giant display boards filled the lobby. Some showed early campaign concepts, others showed product mock-ups. Several featured photographs from her test shoot taken weeks earlier. My daughter stared at the images without speaking. "Mommy?" she whispered. "That's me." I smiled. "Yes, baby." She slowly approached one of the displays. The photograph showed her smiling confidently while wearing her natural curls exactly as they grew from her head. No straightening, no editing, no apology. Just Zuri, beautiful and unapologetically herself. "People are really going to see this?" she asked. "Millions of people." She looked back at me uncertainly. "What if they don't like it?" My heart broke a little hearing the question. Not because she doubted herself, because somebody had taught her to doubt herself. Somebody sitting at a Thanksgiving table. I knelt beside her. "There will always be people who don't like something." She nodded slowly. "Like Grandma?" I forced myself to smile. "Exactly like Grandma." Several employees nearby pretended not to hear. Their expressions told me they heard every word. Zuri considered my answer carefully. Then she looked back at the photograph. "I like it." I kissed the top of her head. "That's the only opinion that matters." The creative team joined us a few minutes later. Marketing directors, stylists, brand strategists, photographers. Some of the most talented people in the industry had spent months building this campaign. Yet the moment they met Zuri, every professional presentation disappeared. They simply adored her. She asked questions. She complimented everyone's outfits. She wanted to know how cameras worked. Within 30 minutes, she had somehow become the unofficial boss of the room. Watching her laugh again felt like medicine. Thanksgiving still lived inside her. I could see it occasionally. The hesitation, the uncertainty. But every compliment chipped away at the damage Brenda created. Every smile rebuilt something that had been shaken. Halfway through the meeting, my phone vibrated. Trent again. Then Chantel. Then Calvin. Then my mother. 23 missed calls in less than 2 hours. I ignored every one of them. Renee noticed the notifications and raised an eyebrow. Persistent. Desperate. She laughed. Same thing sometimes. By late afternoon, we moved into the first production studio. Test lighting filled the room. Cameras rolled into position. Makeup artists prepared equipment. Large digital displays projected campaign concepts onto surrounding walls. One by one, the team walked Zuri through the process. What surprised everyone was how naturally she adapted. There was no fear, no stage fright, no hesitation. The little girl who questioned her beauty 2 days earlier suddenly stood in front of professional cameras with confidence most adults never develop. One of the photographers lowered his camera and shook his head in disbelief. "She has it." I smiled. "What?" "Presence." Several others nodded immediately. They saw it too. Some people learn how to attract attention. Others are simply born with it. The first photo session lasted nearly 3 hours. When it finally ended, applause erupted throughout the studio. Zuri looked confused. "Why is everyone clapping?" The room laughed. One of the stylists answered first. "Because you're amazing." A shy smile appeared on her face. Then she looked at me. Not the photographers, not the executives. Me. As if she wanted confirmation. I nodded proudly. "You did great." Her smile widened. At that moment, every sacrifice suddenly felt worth it. Every sleepless night. Every risk. Every year spent building a company while people called me a failure. It all led here. To this little girl learning she never needed anyone's permission to feel beautiful. As evening approached, the executive team gathered in the conference room for final approval discussions. Campaign schedules covered multiple screens. National distribution plans stretched across the next 6 months. Retail partnerships, television placements, streaming integrations. Everything was ready. Then the chief marketing officer entered, carrying a folder. Her expression looked different, excited, nervous, urgent. "We have something." The room immediately became quiet. She handed me the folder. Inside sat a proposal from one of the largest outdoor advertising firms in the country. My eyes widened as I read the details. Additional placement opportunities, premium visibility, national rollout expansion. Then I reached the final page. Times Square. Not a small placement. Not a secondary screen. One of the largest digital billboards in America. Several executives watched my reaction carefully. "Well?" Renee asked. I looked up slowly. "Approve it!" The room exploded into celebration. People cheered. Someone opened champagne. Another executive nearly knocked over a chair trying to hug the marketing director. The energy became infectious. Everyone understood what this meant. The campaign had just moved from successful to historic. Through all the excitement, I noticed Zuri sitting quietly near the window drawing in her sketchbook, completely unaware of how dramatically her life was about to change. Completely unaware that her face would soon be seen by millions. Completely unaware that somewhere across Illinois, the same family who called her ugly still believed they had won. My phone vibrated again. Another voicemail notification appeared. This one came from Chantel. I almost ignored it. Almost. Then I noticed something unusual. The message lasted nearly 4 minutes. Chantel never talked that long unless she was angry or scared. Curious, I pressed play. Her voice filled the room immediately. "Dominique, I know you're ignoring us, but we need to talk right now. Trent says something is wrong. Dad is asking questions. Mom won't stop crying. And there are people calling the house asking about Zuri. I don't know what you've done, but whatever is happening, you need to tell us immediately." The recording ended. The room fell silent. I slowly looked down at the phone, then at the giant Times Square proposal sitting in front of me, then back at the phone again. Because for the first time since Thanksgiving, my family wasn't acting superior. They were acting scared. And something told me this was only the beginning. The voicemail from Chantel replayed in my head the entire drive home. Not because I felt guilty, because I recognized fear when I heard it. For most of my life, my family spoke to me from a position of superiority. They criticized, they judged, they advised. Fear was new. Fear meant the balance was shifting. The following Monday morning, Crown of Curls officially launched its first national teaser campaign. We didn't release the full commercial. We didn't reveal the complete branding package. We simply uploaded a 30-second preview across social media platforms, streaming services, and partner websites. The marketing team expected strong engagement. Nobody expected what happened next. By lunchtime, the teaser had crossed 2 million views. By dinner, it passed 7 million. By midnight, the campaign dominated multiple trending lists nationwide. My phone vibrated nonstop. News outlets wanted interviews. Podcast hosts wanted appearances. Brand executives wanted meetings. Influencers started sharing clips without being paid. Parents flooded comment sections with messages about their daughters. One mother posted a photograph of her child pointing at Zuri's image on a tablet screen with the caption, "She finally sees someone who looks like her." I saved that post immediately. No financial report would ever mean more to me than that. The next morning, I walked into headquarters and found half the staff gathered around a conference room screen. Applause erupted the second I entered. Renee pointed toward the monitor. "You should see this." The screen displayed social media analytics. Millions of interactions, hundreds of thousands of comments, thousands of reposts. Then I saw the number that mattered most. Positive sentiment, 94%. Marketing teams dream about numbers like that. Most never see them. I smiled. "How's our star handling it?" Renee laughed. "You mean the 6-year-old who already signed 3 autographs this morning?" My smile widened. Zuri sat inside the creative studio drawing pictures while photographers prepared the next phase of production. Fame hadn't changed her. At least not yet. She still carried crayons in her backpack. She still asked whether dinosaurs could become astronauts. She still wanted ice cream after every successful meeting. The only difference was that the world had finally started seeing what I always saw. Then everything became more complicated. Around noon, Renee entered my office carrying another tablet. This time she didn't look excited. She looked irritated. "Your family found the internet." I immediately understood. "What happened?" She handed me the device. Social media filled the screen. Chantel had posted a photograph from years earlier. The image showed her holding baby Zuri during a family barbecue. The caption made my stomach turn. "So proud of my beautiful niece." We've always known she was destined for greatness. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Thousands of people had already liked the post. Hundreds commented about what a supportive aunt she seemed to be. If only they knew. "That's not all," Renee said. Another post appeared. This one belonged to Brenda. "My precious granddaughter is finally receiving the recognition she deserves. We are so proud of her." I laughed once, a cold laugh. 3 days earlier, she called Zuri ugly. Now she was presenting herself as a loving grandmother to strangers online. The hypocrisy would have been impressive if it wasn't so disgusting. Then another post appeared. Calvin. Then Trent. Suddenly my entire family was rewriting history in public. According to social media, they had always supported Zuri. They had always encouraged her confidence. They had always believed in her future. It was a complete fabrication. The comments underneath made it worse. People praised them, complimented them, celebrated them. Nobody knew what happened at Thanksgiving. Nobody knew the truth. "Should we respond?" Renee asked. I looked at the screen for a long moment. Every instinct told me to expose them immediately, to post the truth, to tell the world exactly who they were. Instead, I shook my head. "Not yet." Renee frowned. "Why?" "Because lies need room to grow before they become fragile." She smiled slowly. "That's terrifying." "Good." The campaign continued gaining momentum throughout the week. National media coverage expanded. Brand partnerships increased. Retail demand exceeded projections. Every day brought larger opportunities. Every day brought more attention. And every day brought new attempts from my family to attach themselves to Zuri's success. By Thursday, Chantel had given 2 separate interviews describing herself as one of Zuri's biggest inspirations. By Friday, Brenda was posting childhood photographs she hadn't looked at in years. Calvin even wrote a public message about the importance of supporting young Black girls. I nearly choked reading it. The man spent years sitting silently while his wife tore my daughter apart. Now he wanted applause for his wisdom. The worst part wasn't the lies. The worst part was that some people believed them. Then Friday afternoon delivered something unexpected. I was reviewing contract proposals when my assistant transferred a call directly into my office. "You need to take this." "Who is it?" A pause. Your daughter. I answered immediately. Hey, baby. Silence. Then a small voice. Mommy? Every protective instinct inside me activated. Something was wrong. What's wrong? Another pause. Some girls at school said they saw Grandma on Facebook. I closed my eyes. Of course. What did they say? They said Grandma loves me. The office suddenly felt very quiet. And? Zuri hesitated. I didn't know what to say. That hurt more than I expected. Because children shouldn't have to explain reality to other children. They shouldn't have to defend themselves against lies told by adults. You don't have to say anything, I told her gently. But it's not true. I know. Her answer came quickly. Too quickly. Then her voice became smaller. Why are they pretending now? I looked out the office window toward the city skyline. Some questions deserve honest answers. Because people like being close to success. Silence. Then understanding. Children understand more than adults think. Oh, we talked a few minutes longer before ending the call. But after hanging up, I couldn't focus on work anymore. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt something stronger than anger. I felt resolve. My family wasn't just rewriting history, they were trying to steal part of Zuri's story. And I wasn't going to let that happen. As if the universe agreed, another notification appeared on my screen moments later. It came from the national morning show scheduled to feature Zuri the following week. The producer's message was short. We would love to invite Zuri's grandparents and extended family to join the interview segment. I stared at the email. Then I slowly leaned back in my chair. Because suddenly, I understood exactly how my family planned to turn my daughter's success into their own redemption story. The only problem was that they had no idea I already knew what they were doing. And if they wanted a public stage, I was more than willing to give them one. The invitation from the national morning show sat open on my screen long after everyone else left the office. Most parents would have been excited. Under normal circumstances, I would have been excited too. A national television appearance meant even more exposure for the campaign. It meant more opportunities for Zuri, more representation, more doors opening for little girls who rarely saw themselves reflected in mainstream media. The problem wasn't the interview. The problem was the guest list. Somewhere between our initial negotiations and the final production planning, somebody had convinced the producers that Zuri's extended family should participate. According to the email, the segment would explore the support system behind her success. The irony was so painful it almost became funny. Support system. If America only knew. I forwarded the message to Renee with a single sentence. Find out who spoke to the producers. Her reply arrived 6 minutes later. I already know. Attached beneath the message was a screenshot from social media. Chantel had posted a photograph of herself speaking to a television producer at a charity gala the previous evening. The caption made my blood pressure rise. Excited to celebrate our family's journey with some amazing people, looking forward to sharing Zuri's inspiring story. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My sister wasn't waiting for opportunities anymore. She was actively inserting herself into them. The success she spent years mocking had suddenly become something she wanted ownership of. That afternoon, things became even worse. Brenda started posting childhood stories about Zuri online. Except most of them were complete fabrications. According to Brenda's social media page, she had always encouraged Zuri's confidence. She had always praised her natural beauty. She had always told her she was special. Thousands of strangers believed every word. Comments poured in from people calling her an incredible grandmother. Some even asked for parenting advice. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I saved screenshots. Every lie, every post, every fake memory, because something told me I would need them later. By Saturday morning, the situation escalated again. I was helping Zuri make pancakes when the doorbell rang. Nobody was expected. Security usually announced visitors before they reached the penthouse. The fact that they hadn't meant whoever stood outside probably claimed to be family. Unfortunately, I was right. When I opened the door, Brenda and Calvin stood in the hallway carrying shopping bags and forced smiles. My mother wore the same expression she always used when she wanted something. Calvin looked uncomfortable. Not guilty, just uncomfortable. Surprise, Brenda said brightly. I stared at her. No. Her smile faltered. What? No. I started closing the door. Brenda immediately stepped forward. Dominique, Don't be ridiculous. The entitlement in her voice nearly impressed me. 3 days earlier, she slapped my child. Now she was offended that I wasn't welcoming her inside. We're here to see our granddaughter. No, you're here because she's famous. Calvin sighed heavily. Can we please talk like adults? Adults don't hit 6-year-olds. The hallway fell silent. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Brenda did something truly remarkable. She rolled her eyes. Rolled her eyes. Are we really still talking about that? I looked at her in complete disbelief. Still talking about that? Dominique, it was one moment. One moment. Not a slap. Not racism. Not humiliation. One moment. I finally understood something important. Brenda wasn't sorry because Brenda didn't believe she had done anything wrong. Leave. Her expression hardened immediately. You can't keep her from us. Watch me. Then another voice interrupted from behind me. Grandma? Zuri had walked into the hallway. The second she appeared, Brenda transformed. Her entire face changed. Her posture softened. Her voice became sweet. It was honestly one of the most disturbing things I had ever witnessed. Baby! She exclaimed. I've missed you so much. Zuri stopped moving. She looked confused, then cautious, then uncomfortable. Because unlike adults, children haven't mastered self-deception. They remember how people treat them. Hi, she said quietly. Brenda immediately reached into one of the shopping bags. Look what I brought you. Dolls. Expensive dolls. Designer clothes. Electronics. Gifts worth thousands of dollars. My stomach turned. For 6 years, Brenda barely remembered birthdays. Now she was trying to buy affection in bulk. Zuri looked at the gifts. Then she looked at me. Do I have to take them? That question told me everything I needed to know. Brenda looked wounded. Calvin looked embarrassed. I felt proud. No, baby, I said. You never have to accept gifts from someone who hurts you. Brenda's face turned red immediately. That's not fair. I laughed. Fair? Her eyes narrowed. The sweet grandmother act disappeared as quickly as it arrived. You are poisoning her against us. There it was. The real Brenda. No, I replied calmly. You did that yourself. The conversation deteriorated quickly after that. Brenda accused me of being bitter. Calvin accused me of overreacting. Both claimed they only wanted a relationship with Zuri. Neither apologized, neither accepted responsibility, neither even acknowledged what happened. Eventually, I closed the door in their faces. For a long moment, I simply stood there listening to the elevator carry them away. Then my phone vibrated. Another notification. This one came from Renee. Emergency. Call me. I answered immediately. What's wrong? Her voice sounded somewhere between amused and horrified. You need to see this. A link arrived seconds later. I opened it and nearly choked. Chantel was live on a popular daytime television program. Smiling, crying, telling millions of viewers how proud she was of her niece, describing herself as one of Zuri's biggest supporters, and judging by the way the host kept nodding sympathetically, the audience was believing every word. The worst part wasn't the lies. The worst part was what Chantel said next, because she had just publicly invited the entire country to watch our family's upcoming television appearance, and she clearly had no idea how much evidence I had been collecting. 3 days after the national interview announcement, I finally experienced something I had not felt since Thanksgiving. Peace. Not complete peace, but enough to breathe. The Crown of Curls campaign continued breaking expectations. Zuri's teaser videos dominated social media. Retail partners increased their orders. Media outlets requested additional appearances. For the first time in weeks, I spent an entire morning focusing on work instead of damage control. That peace lasted until 11:17 in the morning. My private phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of my mother's neighbor. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Hello? The woman's voice sounded frantic. Dominique, you need to come. Your mother collapsed. I immediately stood up. What happened? I don't know. Your father says she can't breathe. They called an ambulance. Every ugly memory I carried about Brenda disappeared for a moment. Because no matter what she had done, hearing that someone might be dying changes things. 35 minutes later, I arrived at my parents' gated community. Emergency vehicles were nowhere in sight. No ambulance, no police, no paramedics. My stomach tightened immediately. Something felt wrong. I parked and walked quickly toward the house. Before I reached the front door, it opened. My mother stepped outside. Perfectly healthy, perfectly dressed, perfectly fine. I stopped walking. Brenda smiled awkwardly. Dominique. For several seconds, I simply stared at her. Then I looked past her shoulder. The dining room lights were on. Voices echoed inside. Multiple voices. Not an emergency. A setup. My father appeared behind her. Then Chantel. Then Trent. Every single one of them standing there waiting for me. The realization hit instantly. They lied about a medical emergency to get me into the house. I almost turned around and left. Then curiosity stopped me. If they were willing to fake a health crisis, they were desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. You lied. My voice came out colder than I intended. Calvin stepped forward. Dominique, we needed to talk. So you pretended Mom was dying? Brenda immediately rolled her eyes. Nobody said dying. That answer told me everything. Not one apology. Not 1 ounce of shame. Just justification. I laughed once. Unbelievable. Chantel quickly jumped in. Can we please stop fighting for 5 minutes? There it was again. The family tactic. Cause harm, then accuse the victim of creating conflict. I should have left. Instead, I followed them inside. Part of me wanted to know how far they were willing to go. The answer arrived quickly. The dining room table contained folders, legal documents, financial reports, presentation materials. It looked less like a family meeting and more like a corporate acquisition. Trent stood beside a projector screen wearing the same confident smile he always used when trying to sell bad ideas. The moment I saw that smile, I knew exactly who organized everything. What is this? I asked. Trent clasped his hands together. An opportunity. I nearly laughed. Every disaster in my life seemed to arrive disguised as an opportunity. For who? Nobody answered immediately. That silence told me enough. Finally, Calvin spoke. For Zuri. I sat down slowly. Go on. Trent activated the presentation. Charts appeared. Revenue projections. Brand forecasts. Endorsement estimates. Media opportunities. The numbers were real. The conclusions were not. After 10 minutes of talking, the true purpose finally emerged. They wanted to create a management company. A company dedicated to overseeing Zuri's future earnings. A company controlled by them. Not me. Them. I actually checked to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. You're serious. Chantel smiled. We're trying to help. Help. Interesting word. Nobody wanted to help when Zuri was being insulted. Nobody wanted to help when she cried in the car. Nobody wanted to help when she questioned her own beauty. But money had entered the conversation, and suddenly everyone became generous. Who owns this management company? I asked. Trent clicked to the next slide. The answer appeared instantly. Calvin Wilson, Brenda Wilson, Chantel Harrison, Trent Harrison. My name appeared nowhere. Neither did Zuri's. I looked up slowly. You excluded her mother. Trent cleared his throat. We felt emotional conflicts could interfere with objective decision-making. I stared at him for several seconds. Then I laughed so hard I almost fell out of my chair. Emotional conflicts. Coming from a man whose business was quietly bleeding money every month. Coming from people who lied about a medical emergency 30 minutes earlier. Coming from a family that couldn't survive one holiday dinner without cruelty. Brenda's expression hardened. What's so funny? I pointed at the screen. This. Chantel crossed her arms. You're not taking this seriously. Oh, I am taking it seriously. My smile disappeared. That's why it's terrifying. The room fell silent. I stood and walked toward the projector screen. Let's be honest for 1 minute. Nobody spoke. This isn't about protecting Zuri. More silence. This isn't about her future. Still silence. This is about money. Brenda immediately objected. That's not fair. I turned toward her, then explained why nobody cared about managing her life until she became profitable. The room went completely quiet. Nobody answered. Because nobody could. My father tried next. We're family. Family? I repeated. The same family that sat there while Mom called her ugly? Calvin looked away. Chantel looked down. Even Trent stopped smiling. For the first time all afternoon, nobody had a rehearsed response. I continued. You don't get to ignore a child for 6 years and suddenly become her financial advisors because she appeared on television. Brenda's face turned red. You're twisting everything. No, I shook my head. I'm remembering everything. The silence felt heavier this time. Not because they were thinking, because they were losing. They knew it too. Eventually, Chantel made one final attempt. Dominique, we're only trying to be involved. I looked directly into her eyes. Then be involved. She blinked. What? Call her. Silence. Spend time with her. More silence. Apologize to her. Nobody moved. Because involvement wasn't what they wanted. Access was. The difference mattered. I gathered my purse and stood. The meeting was over. As I reached the doorway, Trent spoke again. You're making a mistake. I turned around slowly. Am I? His confident smile finally returned. You can't protect her from everything. Something about the way he said it bothered me. Not threatening. Not directly. Just wrong. As if he knew something. As if he believed he still had leverage. I studied him for several seconds before leaving. The moment I reached my car, my phone vibrated. A message from Renee appeared on the screen. It contained only one sentence. Dominique, you need to see this immediately. We just discovered something very strange about Trent's finances. I spent the entire drive back to Chicago thinking about Trent's last words. You can't protect her from everything. Most people would have dismissed the comment as arrogance. I couldn't. Something about the way he said it felt deliberate, calculated, like a man holding cards he believed nobody else could see. By the time I arrived at headquarters, Renee was already waiting in my office. Her laptop sat open on the conference table beside a stack of printed reports. The expression on her face immediately told me this wasn't a minor issue. How bad? I asked. Renee exhaled slowly. Bad enough that I wanted you here before discussing it over the phone. I sat down and opened the first report. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Standard business filings, public company records, vendor agreements. Then I noticed the names, several consulting firms, marketing entities, licensing groups. Most appeared legitimate, until I reached the ownership disclosures. My eyes narrowed immediately. The same names appeared repeatedly. Different companies, different industries, different addresses, yet somehow the same people kept resurfacing. What am I looking at? Renee tapped the screen. Shell companies. My stomach tightened. How many? We're still counting. I continued reading. One company billed Trent's startup for strategic consulting. Another billed for market research. Another handled branding services. Millions of dollars had moved through these entities over the last 3 years. The problem was that very little actual work appeared connected to the payments. Who owns them? I asked. Renee rotated her laptop toward me. That's where things get interesting. Several ownership records appeared. Some names had been hidden behind trusts, others behind holding companies, but not all of them. One stood out immediately. Trent Harrison's cousin. Another belonged to a former college roommate. A third listed an address registered to one of Chantel's friends. I leaned back slowly. He's paying himself through other people. Renee nodded. Looks that way. The room fell silent. This wasn't illegal automatically, but it was dangerous. Very dangerous. Especially if investors believed company money was being spent on legitimate business operations. How much? I asked quietly. Renee opened another spreadsheet. The number appeared on screen, nearly $1.7 million. I stared at it for several seconds. Not because the amount shocked me, because it explained so much: the constant cash shortages, the emergency loans, the desperate fundraising, the sudden pressure on my father. Trent wasn't simply running a struggling company, he was draining it. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated. Then again. Then again. 3 notifications appeared simultaneously. 1 voicemail, 2 text messages, all from Trent. I almost ignored them. Then curiosity won. The first message read, "We need to talk immediately." The second arrived 30 seconds later. "This concerns your daughter." My eyes narrowed. There it was, the leverage he thought he had. I pressed play on the voicemail. Trent's voice filled the office. Calm, confident, smug. "Dominique, I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot. You're clearly emotional about family matters, but business is business. We both know Zuri's success is creating opportunities. Maybe we should discuss how those opportunities came together. I paused the message. Renee looked confused. What does that mean? I already knew, or at least I suspected. Keep listening. I resumed playback. You may not remember this, but years ago I was the first person who told your daughter she should be in front of cameras. I encouraged her confidence. I supported her creativity. Without that encouragement, none of this would exist. Frankly, I think people deserve recognition for their contributions. I stared at the speaker in disbelief. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. Trent Harrison was trying to rewrite history. The man who barely remembered Zuri's birthday suddenly wanted credit for building her future. The voicemail continued. I think 30% would be fair. The room went silent. Even Renee looked stunned. 30% of what? She asked. Everything, I replied. The final seconds of the recording confirmed it. Trent believed he deserved 30% of all future campaign revenue connected to Zuri's success. 30%. For existing near the story. I saved the recording immediately. Then I called my attorney. 40 minutes later, we sat inside a conference room reviewing intellectual property records, campaign contracts, licensing agreements, and production documentation. Every stage of the Crown of Curls campaign had been documented meticulously. Every meeting, every draft, every creative concept, every approval. The paper trail stretched back nearly a year. There was only one problem for Trent. His name appeared nowhere. Not once. My attorney smiled while reading the voicemail transcript. This is actually helpful. Helpful? Very. He tapped the recording. People who commit fraud usually try hiding their intentions. Mr. Harrison apparently enjoys documenting his. I smiled. That was one way to describe it. By late afternoon, another surprise arrived. Trent wasn't waiting for a response anymore. He was escalating. A local entertainment blog published an exclusive interview featuring him as a source. The headline immediately caught my attention. Businessman claims he helped discover rising child star Zuri Wilson. I closed my eyes, then opened the article. Every sentence made things worse. According to Trent, he recognized Zuri's potential years ago. According to Trent, he advised me on branding strategy. According to Trent, he played an important role in creating opportunities for her future. None of it was true, not one word. Yet people were already sharing the story online. Some believed it. Most didn't. The problem wasn't credibility. The problem was intent. Trent was building a public narrative, a narrative designed to justify future claims, future demands, future lawsuits. He wasn't just greedy. He was preparing something. Renee finished reading the article and looked disgusted. He's insane. No. I shook my head slowly. He's desperate. Desperate people become predictable. They push too hard, move too fast, reach too far. And eventually they expose something they never intended anyone to see. As if the universe wanted to prove my point, another email appeared in my inbox moments later. The sender wasn't Trent. It wasn't Chantel. It wasn't my father. It came from one of Trent's former investors. The subject line contained only 6 words. You need to see these records. Suddenly, the shell companies on Renee's desk didn't seem nearly as important as whatever waited inside that email. The email from Trent's former investor arrived at 6:43 on a Thursday evening. I was still sitting inside the conference room reviewing shell company records when the notification appeared. Normally, I would have waited until morning. Normally, I would have asked legal counsel to review the material first, but nothing about Trent Harrison qualified as normal anymore. The subject line alone felt urgent. You need to see these records. I opened the message immediately. The investor introduced himself as Marcus Givens. 3 years earlier, he had invested nearly $800,000 into one of Trent's technology ventures. According to the email, he spent the last year trying to understand why company revenue never matched internal projections. Then came the sentence that changed everything. I believe Trent has been moving investor money through entities he secretly controls. My eyes moved quickly through the rest of the message. Attached were bank summaries, payment records, consulting agreements, and internal correspondence. Marcus had already done half the investigation for us. Renee entered the room carrying coffee just as I finished reading the first attachment. One look at my face and she knew something serious had happened. "How bad?" she asked. I rotated the laptop toward her. 5 minutes later, she stopped reading and slowly lowered the screen. "Oh my God!" That reaction told me she saw exactly what I saw. The shell companies weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a system. A carefully designed system. Small amounts moved repeatedly between entities connected to friends, relatives, former roommates, and business associates. Individually, most transactions appeared harmless. Together, they created a different picture. Millions of dollars vanished without creating corresponding business value. "Call legal," I said quietly. "Already doing it." Within an hour, 3 attorneys joined us through a secured video conference. For nearly 2 hours, we reviewed documents line by line. Nobody rushed. Nobody speculated. Every conclusion required evidence. Every assumption required verification. By the end of the meeting, one thing became painfully clear. Trent's problems were significantly larger than simple debt. He had spent years building an illusion. Investors believed they funded growth. Lenders believed they financed expansion. Partners believed they supported innovation. The paperwork suggested something very different. Several attorneys avoided using words like fraud. Lawyers prefer caution. But none of them looked comfortable. The following morning, I authorized a formal forensic review. Not because I wanted revenge, because Trent had attached himself to my daughter. The moment he tried using Zuri as leverage, everything changed. If someone intended to involve my child in their schemes, I wanted to know exactly who they were. Over the next 10 days, the evidence multiplied. Every report created more questions. Every question uncovered another problem. One consultant received over $200,000 despite producing almost no documented work. Another company billed for marketing campaigns that never existed. A third received recurring payments despite having no employees. The pattern became impossible to ignore. By the second week, even my attorneys stopped debating whether misconduct existed. The only remaining question involved scale. How much damage had actually been done? Then came the first crack inside the family itself. Calvin called unexpectedly. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Curiosity won again. "Dominique." His voice sounded different. Tired. "What do you want, Dad?" Silence. Then an answer I never expected. "Were you telling the truth about Trent?" I sat up immediately. "Which part?" Another pause. "The financial problems." There it was. Something had happened. "Why are you asking?" Calvin exhaled heavily. "Because the bank called." My eyes narrowed. Banks rarely call unless circumstances become serious. And they want updated collateral information. That explained part of it, not all of it. "Anything else?" More silence. Longer this time. "There are loan guarantees." Suddenly, the pieces started fitting together. My father wasn't merely supporting Trent emotionally. He was financially connected. Very connected. "How much?" I asked. "I don't know exactly." That answer alone told me the number was substantial. People always know small numbers. They forget large ones on purpose. "Dad." Another pause. "Several million." I closed my eyes. There it was. The real danger. Trent hadn't simply damaged investors. He had dragged my father into the situation too. Calvin continued talking. "Trent says everything is under control." I almost laughed. That phrase should have been printed on the tombstone of every failed business venture in America. "Do you believe him?" Silence answered before words did. Then Calvin admitted something surprising. "I'm not sure anymore." That single sentence mattered more than he realized. For the first time in my life, my father was questioning someone he previously defended without hesitation. The conversation ended shortly afterward, but the damage remained. Calvin had finally seen a glimpse of reality. Unfortunately, reality was about to get much worse. 3 days later, another report arrived from the forensic team. This one focused on personal expenditures. I expected expensive dinners, luxury travel, executive perks, nothing unusual. Instead, I found hidden property payments, unexplained transfers, and recurring withdrawals connected to private accounts. One transaction immediately stood out, then another, then 5 more. By the end of the report, a disturbing pattern emerged. Company money appeared to be funding parts of Trent's personal lifestyle, not occasionally, consistently. My attorneys reviewed the findings that same afternoon. Nobody looked pleased. One attorney removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Another requested additional verification before speaking. The most experienced member of the team finally broke the silence. If these records are accurate, several parties may have exposure. Exposure. Another careful legal word. Translation. People were going to have serious problems. The next week delivered exactly that. One of Trent's lenders froze negotiations. A vendor suspended services. 2 investors demanded documentation. Questions started appearing faster than answers. For the first time, pressure moved in the opposite direction. Instead of Trent making demands, other people began demanding explanations from him. Then came the moment that confirmed everything. A confidential source forwarded an internal email chain from Trent's company. Most of it involved routine business discussions. Then one message appeared near the bottom. I read it twice. Then a third time. The sender was Trent. The recipient list included several executives. The message discussed immediate funding needs. Nothing unusual there. The final paragraph changed everything. We need Wilson's support finalized before month end. Without it, we're out of options. I stared at the screen. Wilson's support. My father, my family, their money, their assets, their future. Suddenly I understood why Trent had become so aggressive, why he wanted access to Zuri, why he demanded percentages, why he pushed management agreements. He wasn't expanding. He was drowning. And drowning people grab whatever floats. The problem for Trent was that he had chosen the wrong target, because less than 20 minutes after reading that email, another message arrived. This one didn't come from an investor. It didn't come from an attorney. It came from a corporate acquisition specialist working for a company called Sterling Acquisitions. The subject line contained only 4 words. We have an opportunity. And the moment I saw the name attached to the proposal, I realized the next stage of this story was about to become much bigger than Trent Harrison. The email from Sterling Acquisitions sat unread in my inbox for nearly 24 hours. Not because I wasn't interested, because I had bigger problems. Trent Harrison had finally stopped pretending. For months he operated in shadows, through half-truths, through manipulation, through carefully crafted narratives. Now he was stepping into the light, and people become dangerous when desperation convinces them they have nothing left to lose. The first sign arrived on Monday morning. Renee rushed into my office carrying her tablet before I even finished my coffee. You need to see this. I took the device and immediately felt my stomach tighten. Trent was standing in front of reporters outside a downtown business conference. Microphones surrounded him. Cameras flashed. And somehow he managed to look both confident and desperate at the same time. The headline beneath the video made everything worse. Entrepreneur claims he helped create Crown of Curls success story. I pressed play. Trent smiled directly into the cameras. I've stayed quiet for a long time because family matters should remain private. But at some point, the truth deserves a voice. I already hated where this was going. Years ago, I recognized something special in Zuri Wilson. I encouraged her creativity. I encouraged her confidence. I helped create opportunities that ultimately led to the campaign everyone sees today. I laughed, not because it was funny, because it was insane. Renee looked equally disgusted. He's actually doing it. Yes, he was. The man who couldn't remember my daughter's birthday without Facebook reminders was now claiming partial ownership of her success. The interview continued. I never wanted credit. But when certain people try rewriting history, eventually you have to defend yourself. That sentence wasn't directed at reporters. It was directed at me. A challenge. A warning. An invitation to fight. Unfortunately for Trent, he picked the wrong woman. By lunchtime, every major entertainment blog had reposted the interview. Most comments mocked him. Some supported him. A few demanded answers. That was all Trent needed. Doubt, uncertainty, attention. He wasn't trying to win public opinion. He was creating noise. Noise creates leverage. Leverage creates settlements. At least that was the plan. Around 2 in the afternoon, my attorney called. He's preparing something. I already knew. A lawsuit? Silence. Possibly. I leaned back in my chair. On what grounds? He doesn't need strong grounds. My attorney sounded irritated. He just needs enough allegations to create headlines. There it was. The real danger, not legal exposure. Public exposure. Even weak lawsuits generate articles. Articles generate questions. Questions damage brands. Trent wasn't trying to win in court. He was trying to force negotiations. My phone rang before I could respond. An unknown number. Normally I ignored those calls. Something told me not to this time. Dominique Wilson. Silence. Then Trent's voice. We need to talk. I smiled immediately. No. You're making this harder than it needs to be. The arrogance in his tone almost impressed me. Funny. I was about to say the same thing. Another pause. Let's be adults. Every manipulator says that right before demanding something unreasonable. What do you want? I asked. Finally. The truth. 30%. There it was. Not 20, not 10, 30. I laughed so hard I had to mute the phone for a second. When I returned, Trent sounded annoyed. What's funny? You. Silence. Then anger. I'm serious. I know. Without me, none of this happens. That sentence made me stop laughing, because suddenly I understood something important. Trent actually believed his own lies. This wasn't performance anymore. It was delusion. Dangerous delusion. The kind that convinces people they deserve things they never earned. You think you built Zuri? I asked quietly. I think I played a significant role. I closed my eyes. Then I stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the city. You want 30%? Yes. Of everything? That's fair. Fair. The word hung in the air between us. Fair. The same man secretly moving money through shell companies wanted to discuss fairness. No. The answer came instantly. Trent's patience finally snapped. Then we'll do this another way. There it was. The threat. Not hidden anymore. Not disguised anymore. Direct. Honest. Stupid. Good luck. I ended the call. Less than 30 seconds later, another notification arrived. Lawsuit draft. He wasn't bluffing. My attorneys reviewed it immediately. The allegations were absurd. Emotional support. Creative influence. Early guidance. Encouragement. Reading the document felt like watching someone sue a weather forecast for helping flowers grow. Yet one thing concerned me. Not the claims. The timing. Trent filed the lawsuit 48 hours before Zuri's national television appearance. That wasn't coincidence. That was strategy. Create controversy. Force attention. Damage momentum. Then negotiate. I spent most of that evening preparing for war. Public relations teams. Legal teams. Media consultants. Everyone assembled quickly. Nobody looked worried, mostly because the evidence supporting Trent's story didn't exist. Then something unexpected happened. Around 9:30 that night, Chantel went live on social media. Within minutes, clips spread everywhere. I watched from my office. People don't know the truth, she told thousands of viewers. My husband sacrificed a lot for our family. He helped Zuri before anyone else believed in her. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Not because she lied, because she sounded sincere. Somehow Chantel had convinced herself that supporting Trent mattered more than protecting reality. Dominique is trying to erase everyone who helped her. The comments exploded immediately. Arguments, debates, accusations. Exactly what Trent wanted. Chaos. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt pressure building. Real pressure. Not because they were winning, because they were creating enough noise to distract from the truth. Then Renee entered my office carrying a folder. Unlike everyone else, she looked excited. Very excited. I think we found it. I looked up immediately. Found what? She dropped the folder onto my desk. Inside sat acquisition reports, corporate ownership structures, debt exposure summaries, financial vulnerability assessments. The logo at the top of every page matched the email I ignored the day before. Sterling Acquisitions. I opened the first report. 3 pages later, my heartbeat accelerated. 5 pages later, I sat completely still. 10 pages later, I finally understood why Sterling Acquisitions contacted me. The company wasn't interested in Trent. It wasn't interested in me. It wasn't interested in Crown of Curls. It was interested in something much bigger. Wilson Enterprises. My father's company. I slowly looked up at Renee. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Debt, exposure, declining liquidity, vulnerable assets. Suddenly, every conversation over the last month made sense. Calvin's panic, Trent's desperation, the fake management company, the pressure for money, the urgency. None of it was random. They weren't preparing for growth. They were preparing for collapse. And according to the final page of the report, that collapse was much closer than anyone realized. Then I reached the last line. The proposed acquisition partner listed beneath Sterling Acquisition's offer made me stop breathing for a second. Because the buyer, preparing to take control of my father's empire, wasn't a stranger. It was me. For nearly an hour after discovering the acquisition proposal, I sat alone in my office staring at the final page. Not because I didn't understand what I was reading, because I understood it perfectly. Wilson Enterprises was dying. The company my father spent 30 years building was standing on a foundation of debt, bad decisions, and misplaced trust. Even worse, most of the damage wasn't caused by market conditions. It was caused by people he willingly allowed into his inner circle. People like Trent, people like Arthur Mason, people who smiled during meetings while quietly protecting themselves. I spent the next week reviewing every document Sterling Acquisitions provided. Unlike the reports from my forensic team, these records focused on the company itself, rather than Trent's personal activities. The conclusions were brutal. Cash reserves were shrinking, credit facilities were tightening, vendor relationships were becoming unstable, several major contracts were already under review. The most alarming discovery involved a series of assets Wilson Enterprises had leveraged repeatedly over the previous 2 years, including my parents' home. Suddenly, Calvin's desperation made perfect sense. The company wasn't looking for growth capital, it was looking for survival. Every conversation he had with me over the previous month sounded different now. He wasn't trying to help Trent. He was trying to save himself. Then the official invitation arrived. Wilson Enterprises had scheduled an emergency board meeting. Attendance required. The timing was not accidental. Internal pressure had reached a point where leadership could no longer avoid difficult conversations. Normally, I would have ignored it. This time, I accepted immediately. The meeting took place the following Tuesday inside the executive conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. I arrived 15 minutes early. Most board members were already present. Some recognized me immediately. Others looked confused. A few whispered among themselves. None of them expected to see Calvin Wilson's daughter walking into that room. Especially not the daughter most people believed had little involvement with the company. My father entered moments later. The expression on his face shifted the second he saw me. Surprise, then confusion, then concern. "Dominique?" I smiled politely. "Good morning, Dad." He looked around the room as if searching for an explanation. Unfortunately for him, explanations were about to become very expensive. Trent arrived shortly afterward. The confidence he carried during television interviews was gone. He looked exhausted. Dark circles framed his eyes. His suit appeared rushed. His smile looked forced. For the first time, he resembled a man carrying problems instead of hiding them. Then, Arthur Mason entered. Arthur had served as Wilson Enterprises' chief financial officer for nearly 11 years. Calvin trusted him completely. That fact would become important very soon. The meeting began exactly as expected. Revenue concerns, liquidity discussions, financing challenges. Nobody smiled. Nobody celebrated. The atmosphere felt heavy from the start. Several board members pushed for immediate solutions. Others demanded explanations. Every answer seemed to create 3 additional questions. After nearly 40 minutes, one board member finally said what everyone was thinking. "How serious is the situation?" Silence followed. Not because nobody knew, because nobody wanted to say it first. Then Arthur adjusted his glasses and opened a presentation file. More serious than most people realize. Every eye in the room moved toward him, including Calvin's. Arthur spent the next 20 minutes explaining the company's financial position. Some information was already known, much was not. As the numbers appeared on the screen, the room grew increasingly uncomfortable. Several directors exchanged worried looks. One investor quietly removed his glasses. Another stopped taking notes altogether. Then Arthur reached the final section of his report. Strategic alternatives. The phrase sounded harmless. It wasn't. Strategic alternatives is corporate language for desperation, asset sales, restructuring, emergency capital, acquisition discussions. Nobody liked hearing those words, least of all my father. "We're not selling the company," Calvin said immediately. Arthur didn't respond. He simply clicked to the next slide. The acquisition interest list appeared. Several names filled the screen. Investment groups, competitors, private equity firms. Then one name appeared larger than the others. Sterling Acquisitions. The room became silent. Calvin's jaw tightened immediately. "We're not discussing that." Arthur looked at him carefully. "We have to." The tension between them became obvious. For years, Arthur followed Calvin's leadership without question. Today felt different. Today, he looked like a man protecting reality instead of loyalty. "The company can recover," Calvin argued. "Maybe." Arthur's answer landed like a hammer. "Maybe. Not yes. Not absolutely. Maybe." The room felt colder. Then something unexpected happened. One of the board members turned toward me. "You've been very quiet, Miss Wilson." Several heads immediately followed, including Calvin's. I smiled politely. "I'm listening." The board member nodded toward the acquisition proposal. "Do you have an opinion?" Before I could answer, Calvin interrupted. "Dominique has nothing to do with this." The irony almost made me laugh. My father spent years assuming I knew nothing about business. Even now, surrounded by evidence, he couldn't imagine another possibility. Arthur looked at me, then at Calvin, then back at me. Something in his expression suggested he knew more than he was saying. "I think Miss Wilson should answer." The room became silent again. Every eye focused on me. I folded my hands calmly. "I think Wilson Enterprises is running out of time." Nobody argued, because nobody could. The numbers already said it. Calvin's expression darkened. "You don't understand the full picture." Arthur finally spoke. "Actually, she does." The room froze. My father slowly turned toward him. "What does that mean?" Arthur removed a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then he pushed it toward Calvin. "I've been trying to tell you the truth for months." Calvin stared at him. "Arthur." "No." Arthur's voice remained calm. "Not this time." The room felt electric. Years of loyalty were cracking apart in real time. Arthur opened the folder. Inside sat financial summaries, lender communications, restructuring recommendations, and internal warnings. Documents Calvin repeatedly ignored. The evidence was overwhelming. Arthur wasn't betraying him. He was exposing reality. The distinction mattered. Unfortunately, reality hurts more. Then Arthur delivered the sentence that shattered what remained of the illusion. "The company would already be insolvent if we hadn't delayed several obligations." Silence. Complete silence. One board member actually whispered a curse under his breath. Another leaned back in disbelief. My father looked stunned. Not because the information was new, because somebody finally said it publicly. The mask was gone. The performance was over. Wilson Enterprises wasn't struggling. It was collapsing. Then Arthur looked directly at me. "I believe it's time." My heartbeat accelerated. Around the table, confusion spread immediately. Nobody understood what he meant, except me. I slowly reached into my portfolio and removed the acquisition documents from Sterling Acquisitions. The room watched in silence. Calvin frowned. Trent looked confused. Arthur simply nodded. Then I placed the documents in the center of the table. "I agree," I said quietly. "I think it's time too." My father stared at the paperwork, then at me, then back at the paperwork again. The realization hadn't arrived yet, but it was coming. And when it did, everything he believed about power, success, and his own daughter was about to change forever. The silence inside the boardroom lasted nearly 10 seconds after I placed the acquisition documents on the table. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound came from the city traffic far below the glass windows. My father stared at the paperwork as if it had appeared from another universe. Trent looked confused. Arthur looked relieved. The directors looked curious. Then Calvin finally reached for the folder. I watched his expression change page by page. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief became shock. Shock became something I had never seen on my father's face before. Fear. Real fear. Not the fear of embarrassment, not the fear of losing an argument, the fear of losing control. "This isn't possible," he whispered. Arthur calmly folded his hands. "Actually, it is." My father flipped through the documents again. Sterling Acquisitions had already completed months of due diligence. Every weakness, every debt obligation, every restructuring scenario, every vulnerable asset, everything sat there in black and white. Then Calvin reached the final page, the buyer's identity. For several seconds, he simply stared at my name. Dominique Wilson. He read it twice, then a third time. Finally, he looked up. "You?" The word barely escaped his mouth. Around the table, heads turned toward me immediately. Several directors looked stunned. One investor actually laughed in disbelief. Trent's face lost all color. "No," he said quietly. "No way." I remained calm. Yes. Nobody spoke for a moment, because suddenly every assumption they carried about me collapsed at the same time. The struggling daughter. The overlooked sister. The family disappointment. Gone. Replaced by a woman capable of buying the company they spent years treating as untouchable. Then Trent stood up so quickly his chair nearly tipped over. "This is a joke." Arthur looked at him. "It's not. She can't do this. She already did." The room felt different now. Power had shifted. Everyone could feel it. My father looked 10 years older than he had an hour earlier. For the first time, he wasn't sitting at the head of the table as the most powerful person in the room. He was sitting there as a man who ignored warning signs until reality arrived with paperwork. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Directors requested additional reviews. Investors requested immediate discussions. Attorneys started scheduling consultations. Nobody talked about growth anymore. Now they were talking about survival. Outside the boardroom, Trent cornered me near the elevators. His carefully maintained confidence was gone. What remained was anger, raw and desperate. "You planned this." I looked at him calmly. "No, don't lie to me. You don't need my help finding the person responsible for your problems." His jaw tightened. "You're trying to destroy my family." The irony almost made me laugh. For months he tried using my daughter. Tried taking control of her earnings. Tried rewriting history. Now he wanted sympathy. "No, Trent." I stepped closer. "You are." The elevator doors opened behind me. Before stepping inside, I added one final sentence. "The difference is that I'm just letting everyone watch." By that evening, news of the acquisition discussions had started leaking into business circles. Not publicly. Not yet. But enough people knew. Enough conversations had begun. Enough rumors started moving. The first casualty arrived less than 24 hours later. Chantel. The same woman who spent weeks giving interviews about family values suddenly discovered that public attention works both ways. It started with a simple article. A small business publication reported that Wilson Enterprises was facing significant financial uncertainty. The story itself wasn't devastating. The comments underneath were. Readers immediately connected the company to recent interviews. Then they connected those interviews to Chantel. Questions appeared, hundreds of them. If the company is struggling, why was she pretending everything was perfect? Why was her husband demanding credit for Zuri's success? Why did every interview sound rehearsed? For the first time, people stopped accepting the story she spent weeks selling. They started examining it. That was much worse. 3 days later, one of the television producers who previously invited Chantel back for another segment quietly canceled her appearance. Then a podcast canceled. Then a speaking event postponed indefinitely. The invitations didn't disappear because of me. They disappeared because producers hate uncertainty. And right now, Chantel was becoming uncertainty. She tried fighting back. More interviews. More social media posts. More emotional videos. Unfortunately, desperation is difficult to hide. Every new appearance made things worse. Every explanation created more questions. Every defense sounded less convincing than the last. Then came the moment everything collapsed. A reporter uncovered footage from Thanksgiving weekend. Not the dinner itself, something much simpler. Security camera footage from a restaurant where Chantel spent nearly an hour loudly mocking the Crown of Curls campaign before discovering who owned it. The clip spread online immediately. Millions watched it. Millions more shared it. There she was laughing about Dominique, laughing about Zuri, laughing about a campaign she later claimed to support from the beginning. The internet reacted exactly how the internet always reacts to hypocrisy, ruthlessly. Overnight, the supportive aunt narrative died. People replayed old interviews and compared them against the footage. The contradictions became impossible to ignore. By the end of the week, the same comment appeared everywhere. She lied. Sponsors noticed. Producers noticed. Followers noticed. Most importantly, Chantel noticed. The phone calls started arriving immediately, first from her publicist, then from event organizers, then from marketing partners. One by one, opportunities disappeared. One by one, relationships evaporated. One by one, people stopped answering. For years, Chantel built her identity around appearances, around image, around being admired. Watching that image crack terrified her more than losing money ever could. Then she called me. 27 times in one evening. I ignored every call. Eventually, she left a voicemail. Her voice sounded different. Smaller, angrier, more frightened. Dominique, this has gone too far. I listened silently. People are attacking me. Another pause. You need to tell them the truth. I laughed softly. Not because she was suffering, because she still didn't understand. The truth? She continued. You know I'm not a bad person. The message ended shortly afterward. I stared at my phone for several seconds before deleting it. The truth was simple. I never exposed Chantel. I never needed to. Chantel exposed herself. All I did was stop protecting her from consequences. 2 days later, another emergency board meeting was scheduled. This time, the agenda wasn't restructuring. It wasn't financing. It wasn't acquisition strategy. It was leadership accountability. And based on the confidential memo Arthur forwarded that morning, someone very important was about to become the public face of everything that had gone wrong. That someone wasn't Trent. It wasn't Calvin. It was Brenda Wilson. And for the first time in her life, nobody was preparing to save her. By the time the emergency board meeting arrived, Wilson Enterprises was no longer fighting rumors. It was fighting reality. Investors demanded answers. Lenders demanded updates. Reporters circled the company like sharks sensing blood in the water. Every day brought another article, another question, another uncomfortable conversation. Yet somehow my mother remained convinced she could talk her way out of everything. Brenda Wilson had spent her entire life believing image mattered more than truth. Most of the time, that strategy worked. Smile at church, donate to charity, host elegant dinners, speak confidently enough and people stop asking difficult questions. The problem was that image only survives when reality cooperates. Reality had finally stopped cooperating. 3 days after Chantel's public collapse, a national daytime talk show contacted my mother. They wanted an interview. The producers framed it as an opportunity. A chance for Brenda to share her perspective, a chance to discuss family conflict, a chance to address recent controversies. Most people would have hired a media advisor. Most people would have declined. My mother immediately accepted. Of course she did. Brenda loved audiences. She loved microphones. She loved being the smartest person in the room. Unfortunately, she was about to discover that television hosts ask questions. The interview aired on a Thursday afternoon. I watched from my office. Renee watched beside me. Half the executive team quietly gathered around the conference room television. Nobody said much. Everyone sensed something important was about to happen. The host began politely. Questions about family, questions about success, questions about Zuri. At first, my mother performed exactly as expected. Warm smiles, gentle laughter, carefully rehearsed answers. According to Brenda, she always encouraged confidence, always supported family, always believed in her granddaughter. It was the same fiction she had been selling for weeks. Then the host changed direction. Mrs. Wilson, some critics have questioned your relationship with Zuri. The smile remained on Brenda's face. Barely. Families have misunderstandings. Of course. The host nodded. But several former family friends claim you've treated your granddaughter differently than your grandson. My mother's smile tightened. That's absolutely untrue. The host nodded again, then looked directly into the camera. Let's examine that. My stomach immediately tightened. Brenda clearly hadn't expected evidence. The first photograph appeared on screen. Bryce's birthday party. Professional decorations. Luxury gifts. Custom entertainment. Then another photograph. Zuri's birthday. A folding table. A small cake. 4 guests. The contrast was impossible to ignore. My mother's expression changed instantly. The host remained calm. Can you explain the difference? Brenda laughed nervously. Circumstances vary. Nobody in the audience looked convinced. Then came more photographs. Family vacations, holiday gatherings, school celebrations. Every image showed the same pattern. Bryce centered, celebrated, elevated. Zuri pushed aside, forgotten, minimized. I watched my mother struggle for answers she had never needed before, because nobody in her world ever challenged her. They accepted explanations. They avoided conflict. Television audiences do not. Then the host asked the question that truly mattered. Did you ever call your granddaughter ugly? The room where I was watching became completely silent. My mother's face froze. For a second, she actually looked afraid. Not because she felt guilty, because she understood where the conversation was heading. No, she answered immediately. A mistake. A terrible mistake. The host nodded slowly. Then another screen activated. Audio equipment appeared. A producer stepped forward. My heartbeat accelerated. Brenda's face turned pale. She knew. Somehow she knew. Thanksgiving. The recording wasn't from inside the dining room. It came from a security system installed near the hallway entrance. Not perfect quality. Not complete. But clear enough. Very clear. Then the audience heard it. Ugly black girl. The words echoed through the studio. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody laughed. For several seconds, absolute silence filled the room. My mother stared at the floor. The host stared at my mother. The audience stared at my mother. Millions of viewers stared at my mother. For the first time in her life, Brenda Wilson couldn't hide behind reputation. Reality had arrived. Would you like to revise your answer? The host asked quietly. My mother opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Because there was nothing left to say. The evidence existed. The words existed. The truth existed. Then came the moment that changed everything. Instead of apologizing, Brenda became angry, real angry. The mask finally shattered. Everyone is overreacting, Renee whispered a curse beside me. The audience gasped. My mother continued digging. People say things when they're upset. Worse, it wasn't meant the way people are pretending. Worse, Dominique has always been dramatic, catastrophic. I actually leaned back in my chair, because suddenly I understood. My mother was incapable of learning, incapable of accountability, incapable of change. The audience understood too. You could see it on their faces. Sympathy disappeared. Disappointment replaced it. Then the host delivered the final blow. Mrs. Wilson, if your granddaughter were sitting here today, what would you say to her? My mother hesitated. Several seconds passed. Then she answered. I'd tell her people are filling her head with lies. That was it. The interview ended right there. Not officially. Emotionally. Everyone watching understood exactly who Brenda Wilson was. The segment concluded minutes later, but the damage was permanent. Sponsors immediately withdrew from Chantel's remaining projects. Community organizations distanced themselves. Invitations vanished. Donations dried up. Even church members began asking uncomfortable questions. For years, my mother controlled every narrative around her life. 1 hour of truth destroyed decades of performance. Later that evening, my father called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. His voice sounded exhausted, older, defeated. I saw the interview. I didn't respond. I should have stopped it years ago. The confession surprised me. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was honest. Maybe for the first time in his life. Dad. He interrupted quietly. I failed you. Silence followed. Then another sentence. And I failed, Zuri. I closed my eyes. Some victories don't feel like victories. This was one of them. The call ended shortly afterward. I sat alone in my office watching the city lights appear outside the windows. Everything my family built was collapsing. Not because I destroyed it, because it couldn't survive the truth. Then my phone vibrated. A message from Zuri appeared on the screen. A simple photo. She stood in Times Square smiling beneath the giant crown of curls billboard. Beneath the picture, she wrote only 6 words. "Mommy, I finally feel beautiful." Tears filled my eyes instantly. Because after everything that happened, after every lie, every betrayal, every humiliation, that was the only victory that truly mattered. And tomorrow, for the first time, the entire world would see exactly who deserved the future and who had already become the past. The morning after Brenda's interview felt strangely quiet. For months, my life had been filled with conflict, investigations, lawsuits, accusations, emergency meetings, and endless attempts by other people to control a story that was never theirs to begin with. Then suddenly, the noise stopped. Not completely. The media still talked. Articles still appeared. Comment sections still debated. But the fight itself was over. Everyone knew it. Most importantly, the people who started it knew it. The following week, the acquisition of Wilson Enterprises became official. After months of financial instability, board pressure, lender concerns, and collapsing confidence, the company accepted the restructuring plan presented through Sterling Acquisitions. Headlines focused on the business side of the story. Industry publications called it a remarkable turnaround. Analysts praised the strategy. Investors celebrated the stability. None of them understood the part that mattered most to me. For the first time in my life, I no longer needed my father's approval. That realization felt more valuable than any company I could ever own. Calvin requested a meeting shortly after the agreement was finalized. We met at a small restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan. No board members, no lawyers, no executives, just a father and a daughter. He looked older than I remembered. Not weak, just tired. Like someone who had finally spent years carrying a burden he could no longer pretend wasn't there. For several minutes, we talked about ordinary things: the weather, work, the city. Neither of us seemed eager to discuss the obvious. Eventually, he broke the silence. I was wrong. 3 simple words. Words I never expected to hear from him. I looked at him carefully. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't negotiating. For the first time, he was simply telling the truth. About what? I asked quietly. He laughed softly. How much time do you have? We both smiled. Then his expression became serious again. I spent years believing success looked a certain way. He stared out across the water. I thought Chantel was the safe choice. I thought Trent was ambitious. I thought image mattered more than character. He shook his head. I was wrong about all of it. I didn't answer immediately. Some confessions deserve silence. And I was wrong about you. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because I needed them, because a part of me once did. Years ago, hearing those words would have meant everything. Now they simply felt honest. And honesty was enough. We talked for nearly an hour. Not as enemies, not as strangers. Just as 2 people finally looking at reality without pretending it was something else. When we left the restaurant, neither of us promised miracles. Relationships don't heal because of one conversation, but they can begin healing because of one. That was enough. Brenda never called. Not once. At first I wondered if she would. Then I stopped wondering. Some people spend so much time protecting their pride that eventually it becomes the only thing they have left. According to relatives, she rarely attended social events anymore. Church attendance became less frequent. Public appearances disappeared entirely. For the first time in her life, she couldn't control the narrative. The world finally saw the person she spent decades hiding. Chantel's situation wasn't much better. Her sponsorships vanished. Her interviews stopped. The followers she worked so hard to impress moved on to someone else. The internet always does. Last I heard, she blamed everyone except herself. Some lessons take longer to learn. Others never arrive at all. Trent's story ended exactly how most people expected. The lawsuit disappeared quietly after his attorneys reviewed the evidence. Several investigations continued moving forward. Investors pursued their own claims. Business partners distanced themselves. One by one, the people who once believed his promises stopped answering his calls. The funny thing about deception is that it requires trust. Once trust disappears, the entire structure collapses, but none of their endings mattered as much as Zuri's beginning. 3 months after the Times Square launch, Crown of Curls officially became the most successful campaign in company history. Sales exceeded projections. New partnerships expanded internationally. Young girls from across the country sent letters, photographs, and messages describing what the campaign meant to them. Some wrote about confidence, others wrote about self-worth. Many simply thanked Zuri for helping them feel seen. We kept every single letter. One Saturday afternoon, I found Zuri sitting in the living room reading through a stack of them. She looked up and smiled. "Mommy? Yes, baby?" She held up one of the letters. "This girl said she stopped hiding her hair because of me." I sat beside her. "That's amazing." Zuri looked down at the paper again. Then she asked the question that truly mattered. "Is that what success means?" I stared at her for a moment. Then I smiled. Because after everything we survived, she already understood something most adults never learn. "Yes," I said softly. "I think it does." Months earlier, she sat in a car asking whether she was ugly. Now she was helping other children believe they were beautiful. That was the real victory. Not the companies, not the money, not the headlines. Her. Later that evening, we walked through Times Square together. Thousands of lights illuminated the city around us. Tourists filled the sidewalks. Music echoed between buildings. Then Zuri stopped walking. High above us, her image smiled down from one of the largest digital billboards in the world. She stared at it quietly for several seconds. Then she slipped her hand into mine. "Grandma was wrong," she whispered. I felt tears fill my eyes immediately. Yes, she was. Zuri smiled up at the screen one last time before looking back at me. Strong, confident, unafraid. Exactly who she was always meant to become. And as we stood beneath the bright lights of Times Square, surrounded by strangers who saw her beauty without question, I finally realized something. The greatest revenge was never buying companies, winning lawsuits, exposing lies, or watching people face consequences. The greatest revenge was helping the little girl they tried to diminish become someone the entire world could admire. And in the end, that was exactly what she did.